Hello, you're on the Reddit Reveals channel. I never believed in signs. I thought they were just coincidences, random events that we try to make sense of when our minds are desperate for meaning. But that night, the night everything changed, I saw something so clear, so undeniable, that I couldn't ignore it. The truth smacked me in the face harder than I ever thought possible. It all started with a phone call. Not any call, her call. The one that seemed harmless at first, but ended up unraveling my entire life. Let me explain. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, half watching TV, when my wife, Lila, walked into the room. Now, Lila had always been distracted lately, if I'm being honest. It was subtle at first, late nights at work, texts that always seemed to go unanswered, her eyes not quite meeting mine the way they used to. I didn't want to admit it, but the distance between us was growing, and I could feel it. But I didn't push. I never pushed. I'd been patient. I'd been the guy who always believed in second chances, third chances, hell, maybe even a fourth. That night, as she entered the living room, she barely even looked at me. She was already halfway to the kitchen when her phone buzzed on the counter beside me. I looked at it instinctively, the screen lighting up with a name that I wasn't familiar with, Alex. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe it was one of her work colleagues. But there was a strange feeling in my gut. I tried to ignore it. I had done that before, pushed aside the discomfort, convincing myself I was overthinking things. But then, the phone buzzed again. Another message. And then another. It was constant, almost like a rhythm. I couldn't help myself. I looked down at the screen once more, and that was when I saw the message that made my blood run cold. I can't stop thinking about you. I'm counting down the days until I see you again. I froze. My heart thudded in my chest. The words felt like a slap. A violent, raw truth I wasn't ready to face. My mind raced. Who was this Alex? And why were they saying these things to Lila? She was still in the kitchen, humming to herself, blissfully unaware that her phone was now in my hands. My first instinct was to confront her, to demand answers. But something stopped me. I wasn't angry yet. Just confused. Hurt, even. I just stood there, staring at the screen, trying to process what this meant. What did it mean? And then, I heard it. Her voice from the kitchen. Are you going to sit there all day? Or are you coming to help with dinner? The words snapped me out of my trance. I felt like I was in a fog, unsure of what to do next. I quickly put the phone back down, but the unease had already settled in my chest, and I couldn't shake it. I walked into the kitchen, trying to act normal. Lila was at the stove, stirring something in a pot. She glanced up as I entered. Everything okay? She asked, her tone light, almost too light. Yeah, just a bit of a headache. I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. She smiled, the same smile she'd always had, but something felt off. Her eyes didn't seem to hold the same warmth they used to. It was like I was staring at a stranger, and I hated that feeling. I needed to know what was going on. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. But the problem was, I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear the truth. That night, after we had dinner and the guests left, I stayed up. Lila had gone to bed hours earlier, her usual early night routine. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself that maybe it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid. But I knew I wasn't. I sat there, alone in the living room, in the quiet of the house. And then, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Lila's phone. It was mine. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I recognized the area code. It was local. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause on the other end, but then a voice spoke, and it wasn't one I recognized. Eliot, the voice asked. It was a woman's voice, low and smooth, but there was something oddly familiar about it. This is Alex. We need to talk. I froze. My heart started pounding again, this time with a mixture of dread and confusion. Talk about what? I asked, my voice hoarse. I think you know, she replied. It's about Lila. And that's when it all came crashing down. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. I couldn't speak. I didn't know what to say. The woman on the other end continued, her words sharp, cutting through the air like glass. I don't want to hurt you, Eliot. But she's been lying to you. Lila and we've been seeing each other for months. The room spun. My head felt light. The truth, the horrifying, undeniable truth, was finally in front of me, and it was worse than anything I had imagined. I couldn't breathe. And then, As if everything was happening in slow motion, I heard Lila's footsteps down the hallway. She was coming towards me. In that moment, I knew one thing. Everything was about to change. I didn't hang up. I couldn't. I just sat there, holding the phone to my ear, trying to wrap my mind around what Alex had just said. My heart was pounding in my chest, like it was trying to break free. The room felt smaller. I felt trapped. I could hear the muffled sounds of Lila moving around in the hallway, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beyond the walls of our living room. "I never wanted you to find out like this," Alex continued, her voice almost regretful, though the words stung like acid. "But it's been going on for too long. You deserve to know. Lila's been lying to you, and I can't keep hiding it." I wanted to shout, to demand more answers, but my throat was dry. I just nodded, though there was no one around to see it. I didn't know what to say. My mind was still reeling from the weight of the truth crashing over me like a tidal wave. I thought I knew my wife. I thought I understood her. But here was a woman, a complete stranger, telling me that everything I believed about our marriage had been a lie. The betrayal was suffocating. "Why are you calling me?" I finally managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. Alex sighed on the other end. "Because you need to hear it from someone who's not Lila. You need to know the whole truth." I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear more, but there was something in her tone, something urgent, that made me stay on the line. I was desperate now, desperate for clarity, for something, anything, that would explain why everything had been falling apart. "She's been distant for months," Alex continued. "And I know she hasn't told you, but she hasn't been happy for a long time. We've been meeting up when you're at work, when you're out of town. It's been something real, Eliot." Her words echoed in my mind, each one sinking deeper into my gut. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to feel. Rage? Sadness? Confusion? It was all a blur. The worst part? I realized, in that moment, that I wasn't angry at Alex. She wasn't the one who had lied to me, deceived me, and destroyed everything we'd built. No, that person was standing in the hallway outside the room, unaware of the conversation unfolding. That person was my wife. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, struggling to control my emotions. I could hear Lila getting closer. I needed answers before she walked into the room. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to know the truth," Alex said, her voice softer now, almost apologetic. "I don't want to hurt you more than I already have, but you deserve to hear it from me, and I don't want to be a part of this anymore. It's not fair to you." The air in the room grew thick as I tried to process what she was saying. I could feel my anger building, rising like a wave, but it was a helpless kind of anger. What could I do? What could I even say? My wife had been lying to me, and I was standing here, frozen, unable to do anything about it. "She's in love with me, Eliot. She has been for months." "I'm sorry," Alex added softly. "I know this isn't easy to hear, but it's the truth." In that moment, my blood went cold. Lila was in love with someone else. Someone who wasn't me. And the worst part? I had been blind to it. I had been so wrapped up in my own insecurities, my own desire to keep the peace, that I didn't see the cracks forming in the foundation of our marriage. Suddenly, the door to the living room creaked open, and Lila stepped inside. She was wearing her soft, old sweater, the one she always wore when she felt vulnerable, and her hair was messily tied back. Her expression was neutral, like she hadn't just been a part of the most gut-wrenching conversation I'd ever had in my life. "Eliot?" she asked softly, her voice unsure. "Is everything okay in here?" I didn't know what to say. I couldn't bring myself to look at her. I just stood there, holding the phone, feeling the weight of everything she had hidden from me. The lies, the secrets, the affair, it all felt like a cruel joke. Lila noticed the tension in the air, the silence that stretched on far too long. "Eliot?" she repeated, this time with more urgency in her voice. I swallowed hard and finally turned to face her. The words didn't come immediately. I wanted to scream at her, ask her how long this had been going on, but my voice felt choked, trapped. "Who is Alex?" I asked, my voice trembling. It was the only question that mattered now. It was the one thing I needed her to answer. Lila froze. The color drained from her face, and her eyes widened. In that moment, I knew she knew that the truth was out. She knew I knew. Her walls, the ones she had spent months building, came crashing down. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her voice shaking. I shook my head, holding the phone up so she could hear the voice of the woman who had been with her, behind my back, for months. Don't lie to me, I said, my voice growing firm. Alex called me. She told me everything. Lila's face turned pale, and I saw the panic in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For a brief moment, I thought I might actually hear the truth from her lips. But she didn't say anything. Instead, she just stood there, staring at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and fear. I felt the weight of it all, the betrayal, the heartbreak, crushing me. But there was something else too, something darker, a burning need to know why, to understand how everything had gone so horribly wrong. And then, without saying another word, Lila turned around and walked toward the door. As she reached the threshold, she stopped and looked back at me. I never wanted to hurt you, Eliot, but I can't keep living this lie. And with that, she left. She walked out the door, leaving me standing there, alone, holding the phone, unsure of where to go from here. I stood there, stunned, my fingers still clutching the phone as if it might disappear at any moment. The room felt distant, almost hollow, as I tried to process what had just happened. Lila had left. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had spent years with, had walked out without a single glance back. The silence in the house felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in around me, and the weight of her words was heavy in the air. She had been lying to me. All this time, she had been lying to my face. And Alex, her lover, had called to rub salt in the wound, to make sure I knew everything. The betrayal was sharper than I had imagined. It wasn't just an affair. It was everything that came before, everything that had been building beneath the surface, hidden from me. I couldn't believe how naive I had been. How could I have missed the signs? The little changes that had been creeping in, like shadows in the corners of our relationship. I set the phone down on the coffee table with a trembling hand, and it was only then that I realized how hard I was breathing. It felt like my lungs were constricting. I needed to get out of this house. I needed air. I needed space to think, but I couldn't seem to move. Every thought felt trapped, swirling in a chaotic mess, and nothing made sense. I wanted to scream, to call out to her, to demand that she come back, to explain. But deep down, I knew there was no point. The moment she left, it was over. I found myself pacing the living room, like a caged animal, trying to understand what I had just heard. What had happened to us? To me? How had it come to this? The images in my head, the phone buzzing with messages, Lila's guarded smile, the late nights, the sudden distance, everything clicked into place. And yet, it didn't make it any easier to accept. I grabbed my coat and headed out the door, not knowing where I was going, just knowing I couldn't stay here any longer. The cool night air hit my face like a slap, but it didn't help clear my mind. I wandered down the street, aimlessly, my thoughts spiraling out of control. The city felt different at night. The lights seemed dimmer, the streets quieter. Everything seemed distant. As I walked, I kept replaying the conversation in my mind. Alex's voice, the things she had said, "She's been lying to you, Eliot. Lila's in love with me." Those words echoed in my mind, each one sharp and jagged. I didn't know what hurt more, the affair itself or the realization that my wife had been hiding something so big from me. I had trusted her. I had given her everything. And this was how she repaid me. I walked for what felt like hours, trying to escape the thoughts that were chasing me. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't outrun the truth. Lila wasn't the woman I thought she was. And in a way, I wasn't the man I thought I was either. I had ignored the signs. I had let myself believe that everything was fine, that we were just going through a rough patch, that we would work it out. But now I saw it for what it was, a lie, a carefully constructed facade that had finally crumbled. I eventually found myself at a small cafe, the kind that stayed open late for people like me, people who were trying to make sense of things in the dark. I sat at a corner booth, the dim lighting casting shadows on the table. My hands were shaking as I picked up the cup of coffee that had been placed in front of me. I didn't even remember ordering it. The bitterness of the coffee matched the taste in my mouth, but it did little to calm the storm inside me. I stared at the cup for a while, my mind still trying to process the night's events. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. My heart skipped a beat, and I looked down at the screen. It was a message from Lila. "I'm sorry, Eliot. I don't know how to make this right. I know I've hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. But I can't come back. Please understand. It's too late." The words hit me like a freight train. I read them again, trying to find some sort of explanation in them. But there was nothing. No remorse. No understanding. Just cold detachment. She was gone. And in that moment, I realized that the woman I had spent so much time loving, the woman I had trusted with everything, had already moved on. She had made her choice, and it wasn't me. I sat there, staring at the message, feeling a strange numbness settle over me. There was no anger now, no rage. Just an overwhelming sense of loss. I wanted to respond, to tell her everything I felt, to scream and beg for answers. But I knew deep down it wouldn't change anything. She had made her decision, and I had to live with it. The truth was, this wasn't just about an affair anymore. It was about everything that had been left unsaid, the years we had spent together, building a life that now felt like a fragile house of cards, ready to collapse. And it was collapsing. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go from here. All I knew was that I had to keep moving forward. I had to pick up the pieces of my broken life and somehow find a way to keep going. But the hardest part was accepting that the person I thought I knew, the person I had trusted, had been lying to me the whole time. And as I sat in that cafe, nursing the bitter taste of the coffee and the reality of my situation, I knew this was just the beginning of something far more painful. I didn't have the answers yet, but I would find them, one way or another. I don't know how long I sat there in that cafe, staring at the message on my phone, the words blurring together until they felt like a dream I couldn't wake up from. The truth kept circling in my head, grinding against my skull like a persistent drumbeat. She's gone. She chose him. The realization hit me over and over again, until I thought I might go insane from the sheer weight of it. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Lila, though this time it wasn't as long. Just a single line that felt like a slap in the face. I hope you find peace, Eliot. I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It wasn't relief. It wasn't closure. It was as if a door had been slammed shut in my face, but I was still standing in the hallway, unable to move, unable to accept it. How could she just walk away like this? How could she be so cold? I had questions. So many questions. But I already knew the answers. She had made her choice. And it wasn't me. I closed my eyes, leaning back against the cold cafe chair, and tried to remember a time before all of this. A time when things were simple. When I was the one who made her laugh, the one she leaned on. There had been a time, I swear there had, when we were happy. When love was something pure, something effortless. But somewhere along the way, we had lost that. Or maybe, I had just been blind to the cracks forming beneath the surface. The worst part wasn't the affair. It wasn't the lies. It was the sudden, undeniable realization that I didn't really know her anymore. Not like I thought I did. She wasn't the woman I had married. She had become someone else entirely, someone I couldn't reach, someone who had made her decisions long before I ever knew. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor, and stepped out of the cafe, the cold night air hitting me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know what I was doing or where I was going. I had no plan. I just needed to move. To escape the overwhelming sense of betrayal that felt like it was swallowing me whole. I wandered through the empty streets, the quiet of the city pressing in around me. Everything seemed so distant, so hollow. I didn't belong here anymore. I didn't belong anywhere. Not with Lila gone. Not with my world shattered. As I walked, I found myself heading toward the park where Lila and I had spent so many afternoons together. It was a place filled with memories, a place where everything used to make sense. The trees were bare now, the chill of the autumn air hanging heavy in the silence. I walked through the park, each step feeling like a heavy weight, each breath harder to take than the last. I stopped by the old bench where we had sat for hours, talking about everything and nothing, where we had promised each other that nothing would tear us apart. I looked at it now, the same bench, but it felt like a different world. I could almost hear her laughter, feel the warmth of her hand in mine. It felt like a lifetime ago. I sat down, my hands buried in my pockets, staring at the ground, trying to hold on to something, anything, that would make sense of all this. But there was nothing. No answers. Just a gaping hole in my chest where the life I thought I had lived with Lila used to be. I thought about calling her, about confronting her, demanding an explanation. But I knew deep down it wouldn't matter. I had already heard the truth, even if she wasn't ready to admit it. I had already seen everything I needed to see in her eyes the moment she left without a second glance. She was gone, and that was all that mattered. I spent the next few days in a haze. The city felt different somehow. I had trouble recognizing it. It felt like everything I had built my life around had been turned upside down. Lila's absence was like a hole in the fabric of my existence. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, but it was always just out of reach. She was somewhere else, with someone else, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a life that no longer made sense. I didn't want to admit it, but there was a part of me that still hoped she would come back. That maybe this was just a phase. Maybe she had just been confused, overwhelmed. Maybe we could still fix this. But every time I thought about it, every time I even considered the possibility, the reality of her leaving hit me harder. I couldn't keep holding on to a fantasy. I had to face the truth. Lila had made her choice. She had moved on, and I was left with nothing. I started going through the motions, working, eating, sleeping, but nothing felt real. I would wake up in the mornings, still in the same bed we had shared, and for a moment, everything would feel normal. But then I would remember. I would remember that she was gone, that she had chosen him, and everything would come crashing back. I tried to reach out to my friends, tried to talk to them about what had happened, but it felt like no one understood. How could they? How could anyone understand the crushing weight of losing the person you thought you would grow old with? The person who had become your entire world, only to be torn away without warning. I needed answers. I needed to know why. Why had she done this? What had changed? Was I that blind? Was I that easy to forget? I tried to push these questions aside, to tell myself that I didn't need the answers. But deep down, I knew I would never find peace until I had them, until I could look her in the eyes and understand why everything had fallen apart. But that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. As the days stretched on, I found myself wondering if I would ever be the same again. If I could ever look at a relationship the same way. If I could ever trust someone the way I had trusted her. I didn't know. I didn't know if I ever could. And as I sat on that park bench, staring into the empty night, I realized that the hardest part of all wasn't losing her. It was realizing that I had lost myself along the way. I didn't know how long I sat there in the cafe, staring at Lila's last message, the words blurring together until they no longer had any meaning. My mind felt foggy, as if I was watching everything unfold from a distance, detached from reality. I had been betrayed, but it wasn't just the affair that tore at me. It was the sense of loss, the realization that the woman I thought I knew and loved had become a stranger. And worse, a stranger who no longer had any place in my life. Her words echoed in my mind. I hope you find peace, Eliot. But it wasn't peace I needed. It was answers. It was clarity. But there was no way to get them now. I was left to pick up the pieces of something that no longer existed. I was trying to understand what had happened, why it happened, and why she had done this to me. But every time I tried to piece it all together, the puzzle seemed more and more impossible to solve. I stood up, leaving the cafe without a second glance. I had to get out of there. The walls of that place felt like they were closing in on me, and every person I passed seemed like a reminder of how alone I was. The streets outside were cold, almost fitting for the storm that was brewing inside me. My feet moved without purpose, carrying me through the city I thought I knew so well. But now, every corner seemed unfamiliar. Every streetlight, a symbol of the life that once was. I walked aimlessly, my thoughts a whirlpool of confusion, anger, and sadness. How had I not seen this? How had I ignored all the signs? The late nights, the distant look in her eyes, the way she had started to pull away from me little by little. I had convinced myself that things would get better, that the tension was just temporary, but now it felt like I had been living in a lie. I had been living in someone else's version of reality. I didn't know how long I walked. Maybe it was an hour, maybe more. The city felt smaller now, as if the distance between me and the rest of the world had grown too vast to cross. Every step felt heavier than the last, and I found myself heading toward a place I had tried to avoid, the park. The one place where Lila and I used to go when everything was still simple, where we would talk for hours about everything and nothing, where we promised each other we would never let go. The irony wasn't lost on me. The park now felt like a cemetery for my memories. As I walked through the familiar paths, I could almost see her beside me, her laughter ringing in the air, her hand in mine. But it was all gone now. She was gone, and all that was left were the shadows of what could have been. I reached the bench where we had sat countless times, watching the world go by, lost in each other's company. I sat down, feeling the weight of the past settle over me like a heavy blanket. The world seemed so quiet, so still, yet the noise in my head was deafening. What had I missed? What had I ignored? I wanted to scream, to release all the frustration and anger I felt, but it seemed pointless. I couldn't change what had already happened. I couldn't change her decision. The phone buzzed again. A message from Lila. This time, it wasn't a long paragraph, just one line. I never meant to hurt you, Eliot. I'm sorry. I didn't know what to feel anymore. I wasn't angry at her. I didn't even know if I still loved her. I just felt lost. The words she had written seemed so empty, so devoid of any real meaning. I had hoped for something more, something that could make me understand why this had to happen. But there was nothing, just a fleeting apology, and then silence. I put the phone down, staring at the dark sky above. The stars seemed so far away, just like the life I used to have. I had built so many expectations around our future, around the life we would have together. But now all of that was gone. How had I allowed myself to believe that everything would stay the same? How had I let myself become so naive? I didn't know how long I had been sitting there, but eventually, the cold began to seep into my bones. I stood up, my legs shaky, and started walking again. But this time, I had no destination, no plan. I just walked, letting the rhythm of my footsteps drown out the constant buzz of thoughts in my head. I ended up at a small diner, one of those places that never seemed to change. It was nearly empty, save for a couple sitting in the corner booth, lost in their own world. I sat down at the counter, ordering a coffee I didn't even want, just something to hold in my hands, something to distract me from the emptiness that seemed to have settled inside me. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 2 a.m. The city was still alive, but to me, it felt like I was the only one awake. The weight of what had happened was pressing down on me, and I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape the feeling that I had been completely blindsided, that I had been living a life I thought I understood, only to find out it was all a lie. My phone buzzed again, but this time, I didn't look. I didn't need to. I already knew what it would say. More empty words. More apologies. But no explanation. And no way to fix what had been broken. I finished my coffee and left the diner, stepping out into the cold night air once more. I didn't have the answers I was looking for. I didn't even know what I wanted anymore. I just knew that the person I had been was gone. The man who trusted his wife, the man who thought he had everything figured out, was no longer here. I couldn't go back to who I was. And the worst part? I wasn't sure who I was supposed to be now. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The words she had said, the way she left, as though nothing had happened between us, as though we weren't something special, weren't a part of each other's lives for so long. She had become a ghost, and I was left haunted by everything that was left unsaid. I was stuck in this loop of uncertainty, replaying the same moment over and over, hoping to catch something I missed, some clue that could explain how I ended up here. I hadn't gone back home yet. I couldn't. The thought of walking into that empty house, the space that was once filled with laughter and warmth, felt like a punishment. Lila had left her things behind, and just thinking about having to sort through them made my stomach turn. It was like she had taken the very essence of home with her when she left. I couldn't bring myself to face that yet, not with so many questions still lingering. I spent the next few days walking through the motions. Work felt like an endless blur, my mind too consumed with thoughts of her, with thoughts of us, to focus on anything else. I hadn't answered her messages. I didn't know if I ever would. Each one felt like another attempt at fixing something that couldn't be fixed. I wanted her to feel the same weight of this loss, but what good would it do? And then, on the third day after she left, I received a call. The name on the screen made my heart drop. It was Julian. I stared at the phone for a moment before answering, my hand trembling just enough to make the call feel like an out-of-body experience. Julian had been my best friend for years, but right now, he felt like a stranger. A betrayal wasn't something you could easily erase, especially not after everything that had happened. I wondered how long he'd known about what was going on. Eliot. His voice came through, low and uncertain. I need to talk to you. I could feel the weight of those words in my chest. The last time I had seen him, I had barely been able to look him in the eye. Now his voice seemed even more distant, like he was bracing for something. I'm not sure I want to talk to you right now, Julian, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. It wasn't anger I felt. It was hurt. Raw, guttural pain. I understand that, he said quickly. But listen to me, okay? You need to know something. I felt the space between us stretching even further. What's left to know? I couldn't keep the bitterness from slipping into my words. Lila's gone. You both made sure of that. What else is there? There was a long pause before Julian spoke again, his voice carrying a weight I hadn't expected. It's not what you think, Eliot. This isn't just about the affair. There's more. And you deserve to hear it from me. I felt my chest tighten, like a vice closing in. I didn't want to hear more. What could possibly make this situation worse? I had already been betrayed by the two people I trusted most. And yet, something in his voice, something desperate, made me hesitate. Fine, I said, my voice raw. Tell me. I could hear him take a deep breath on the other end of the line. Lila isn't the woman you think she is, he began. And I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I've been part of the lie too. I didn't want to get involved, but I can't keep sitting back and letting you suffer like this. I felt a coldness wash over me. Every instinct told me to hang up, to push him away. But the need for answers that were slipping through my fingers, kept me on the line. Go on, I said, my voice barely audible. Lila didn't just start cheating on you recently, he continued. It started a long time ago, Eliot, before the affair with me even happened. I blinked, disbelief flooding through me. What the hell are you talking about? I whispered, feeling the world shift beneath my feet. Lila has been involved in multiple affairs over the years, Julian said, his voice cracking with guilt. Not just me. Not just the one with Alex. There are others, and I think you need to know the truth, no matter how much it hurts. I tried to ignore it, but the truth is, you've been in the dark about so much. You don't even know the half of it. My mind was spinning. How could this be possible? How could she have hidden this from me for so long? My heart was pounding in my chest as the truth began to settle in. This wasn't just a single betrayal. It was a pattern, a series of lies, one after another. And I had been blind to it all. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and anger. Why didn't you warn me? I tried, Julian's voice faltered. But I didn't want to lose our friendship. And I thought you'd figure it out yourself. I was wrong. I didn't know how to process this. I didn't know what to say. My entire world had just come crashing down, and all I could do was listen to Julian's voice on the other end, telling me the things I never thought I would hear. And there's one more thing, Julian added, his voice lowering. Lila, she wasn't just running away from you, Eliot. She was running away from herself. What does that even mean? I asked, my head spinning. She's been hiding things from everyone, including herself. She's not the person you think she is, and I think deep down, she's been trying to escape the life you two built together for years. She used you as a way to avoid facing her own demons. She never loved you the way you thought she did. I'm sorry. I should have told you earlier. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. What was real? What was true? How much of my life had been built on lies? Lila's betrayal was worse than I ever imagined. And the worst part? She had never been honest with herself, let alone me. She had been hiding behind the mask of a perfect life, and now it had all come crashing down around us. For a moment, all I could do was sit there, letting the weight of everything Julian had just told me sink in. I felt empty, hollow, and I realized then that I wasn't just mourning the loss of Lila. I was mourning the loss of everything I thought I knew. My life, my marriage, my entire existence had been built on a lie. Julian's voice pulled me back to reality. Eliot, I know this is a lot to take in, but I didn't want you to be in the dark anymore. You deserve to know the truth. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to respond to any of this. All I could manage was a broken, hollow whisper. Thank you, Julian. I guess I needed to hear it. And with that, I hung up. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down. I sat there in silence, feeling like a stranger in my own life, wondering where I went wrong, wondering if I would ever be able to trust again. It was the kind of silence that crushed you from the inside out. The kind of silence that suffocates any hope of clarity. After Julian's call, I didn't know what to think, let alone what to feel. He had told me things about Lila that I never expected to hear. Things that twisted the knife deeper than I thought was possible. She wasn't just unfaithful. She wasn't just betraying me. She was running from her own self. And I had been the fool standing in the way, believing in something that wasn't real. I didn't know how to move forward. The world I had built with Lila seemed like a house of cards now, a facade that had crumbled to dust before my eyes. Every moment we spent together, every laugh, every touch, felt like a lie. She had been playing a part, and I was the unwitting audience, clapping along while the curtain closed on me without warning. I stood there in the middle of my living room, my hands shaking as I paced back and forth, trying to make sense of it all. The apartment we had shared felt too small now, as if the walls were closing in on me, suffocating me with memories I didn't want to relive. The air felt thick with her absence, with the ghost of everything that was no longer there. I couldn't escape the sound of her laughter in the kitchen, the feeling of her body beside mine in bed. But those moments, those memories, now felt like nothing more than echoes. I needed to get out. I couldn't stay in this place anymore. I couldn't breathe in here. I grabbed my coat and left the apartment, stepping into the cold night air, as if the chill could somehow cleanse me of everything that had happened. But it didn't. The night was just as empty as my mind. I walked for hours, aimlessly, letting my feet carry me wherever they pleased, trying to outrun the storm that was raging inside me. But no matter how far I walked, no matter how much distance I put between myself and the apartment, I couldn't escape the reality that was waiting for me when I returned. I found myself on a street I didn't recognize. Everything felt distant, like I was floating in some dream, disconnected from the life I had once known. The streetlights blurred as I walked past, my mind still racing. I thought of Julian's words, of the things he had told me. Lila was never the woman you thought she was. I couldn't stop hearing them in my head, and I couldn't escape the feeling that my entire existence had been a lie. It felt like I had been living someone else's life, a life that was built on lies and half-truths. How long had I been blind to the truth? How long had I been living in this illusion, believing that Lila and I were happy, when all along, she had been hiding a part of herself from me? I couldn't trust anything anymore. Not my memories. Not the things we shared. Nothing. I walked for what felt like hours, until my legs were sore and my thoughts were a jumbled mess of confusion. When I finally stopped, I found myself standing in front of a bar I had passed countless times, but never entered. It was small, dimly lit, the kind of place that promised anonymity. Without thinking, I walked inside. The dim interior of the bar was a sharp contrast to the world outside. The hum of conversation filled the air, but no one seemed to notice me. It was exactly what I needed, an escape, a place to lose myself in the noise of other people's lives. I found a seat at the bar and ordered a drink, the burn of the liquor doing nothing to quiet the chaos in my mind. As I sipped my drink, I looked around, but I wasn't really seeing anything. I was lost in my thoughts, consumed by the whirlwind of betrayal, anger, and confusion that had taken over my life. I couldn't believe it. Julian had dropped a bombshell on me, and now I was left picking up the pieces, trying to understand what had happened. But there was no understanding it. No way to make sense of the wreckage. I thought about calling Lila, confronting her, demanding answers. But then I realized that I didn't want answers. Not from her. What good would they do? She had already made her decision. She had already chosen the path she wanted to take, and I was nothing more than a casualty in her wake. But there was something else gnawing at me. Something Julian had said that kept echoing in my head. She was running from herself. That line stuck with me, turning over in my mind. What had she been running from? What was so broken inside of her that she had to tear everything apart to escape it? I finished my drink and ordered another, trying to drown the questions that kept creeping to the surface. But they wouldn't go away. They never would. The bartender placed another drink in front of me, and I stared at the amber liquid for a moment before taking a long sip. My mind was hazy, the alcohol dulling the sharp edges of my thoughts, but it didn't change the reality. I was still living in the aftermath of Lila's departure, still haunted by the fact that the life I had built with her was nothing more than a shattered mirror. I didn't know how I was supposed to move forward. I didn't know if I could. I wanted to believe that everything would eventually make sense. That time would heal the wounds. But I knew it wouldn't be that simple. The truth was, I would never be the same. The world outside was still spinning, but in that moment, sitting in the dim light of the bar, I felt like I was standing still, frozen in time. And I had no idea how to move from this point. I wasn't sure what the next step was. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I couldn't keep pretending that the life I thought I had was still there. It was gone, and it wasn't coming back. Now, all I had left were the shattered pieces of the man I used to be. I don't know how much time passed before I finally decided to leave the bar. The alcohol had dulled the edge of the pain, but it was still there, lurking beneath the surface. The weight of everything still pressed down on me, and the questions wouldn't stop. But one thing had changed. I wasn't running anymore. I had spent days, maybe weeks, running away from what had happened, trying to escape the reality of my life falling apart. But now, I was ready to face it. As I stepped back into the night air, it was as if I could breathe a little easier. I wasn't completely free from the burden yet, but the strangling grip of despair was loosening. I still didn't know where I was going, but I knew I wasn't going to let myself drown in the wreckage of what Lila had left behind. I walked, not aimlessly this time, but with purpose. My feet carried me forward, not away from the pain, but through it. I didn't have the answers, and I didn't need them right now. I just needed to keep moving, to take one step after another, until I found something more than this dark place I had been trapped in for so long. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache. The room was still and quiet, the sunlight filtering in through the curtains, casting long shadows on the floor. For a moment, I was tempted to retreat back into the darkness. But then, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the smallest spark of something that resembled hope. I wasn't the same person I had been before all of this, and I wasn't sure who I would become. But I realized that this, what I was going through, wasn't the end. It was a beginning. A painful, heart-wrenching beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. The next few weeks weren't easy. There were moments where the grief threatened to swallow me whole. There were nights where I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I would ever be able to trust anyone again. But there were also moments of clarity, small ones, when I realized that I was still here, that I was still standing. I started picking up the pieces of my life, bit by bit. I focused on things that I had neglected for so long, things I had forgotten about when I was so wrapped up in my relationship with Lila. I reconnected with old friends, people who had been a part of my life before everything had changed. I threw myself into work, rediscovering passions and projects I had abandoned long ago. And slowly, but surely, I began to heal. It wasn't a straight path. There were days when the pain came rushing back, reminding me of what I had lost. But there were also days when I woke up feeling lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my chest. I was learning to forgive, not just Lila, but myself. One day, I found myself sitting in a park, just watching the world go by. The sun was setting, and the air was cool and crisp. I hadn't felt this at peace in a long time. I had no idea what the future held, but I had come to accept that I couldn't control everything. Some things were beyond my grasp, and trying to hold on to the past would only keep me stuck. I had been given a second chance at life, a chance to rebuild from the ground up. And while I wasn't sure where that path would lead me, I knew one thing for certain. I was going to walk it. I was going to take each step, no matter how small, with the knowledge that I was stronger now. As I stood up, stretching out the kinks in my back, I felt a new sense of clarity. I didn't need to know what came next. I just needed to keep moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that everything was going to be okay. Not perfect, not without scars, but okay. And that was enough. The journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. And I was ready for whatever came next.